destructive, dishonest, ahistorical, racist, theft. Expropriation without compensation can be summed up in these 5 words. Each of these words have been chosen for a very particular reason. If you understand why expropriation without compensation amounts to destructive, dishonest, ahistorical, racist, theft, then you have to agree that this motion has to be combated right up to the boardrooms of the United Nations, if needs be. In this episode of Fact Sheet, I will explain why I say so. So the South African Parliament has decided to embark on a process to change the South African Constitution to allow for expropriation of property by the South African government without paying those whose property they take. To start with, we need to understand 3 concepts, namely restitution, redistribution, and nationalization. Restitution is to say that a mistake or a transgression has to be corrected. In other words, there where a piece of land was illegitimately taken from someone, that has to be corrected. This can be supported in principle. That is why there's been a process of land claims since 1996, although this process has of course been characterized by corruption and government inefficiency. Redistribution is something else. Redistributionists don't care if the land that you own is legitimately yours or not. The purpose of redistribution is to look at the color of your skin in order to determine if you should own that land or not. Racial redistribution borders on a crime against humanity and could even amount to ethnic cleansing. Expropriation without compensation is neither restitution nor redistribution, but a policy of nationalization. It is clear from the policy documents of both the ANC and the EFF that the goal is for the state to own the land, or to act as a so-called custodian and to have the people work it. And it is not only agricultural land that is targeted. If the EFF and many within the ANC gets its way, this would apply to all property. Expropriation without compensation is destructive. Expropriation without compensation would be destructive because it is a duplication of the economic policies that created the world's worst economies and an attack on the economic principles that created the world's wealthiest economies. The ANC and EFF's ideas on land reform has been tried in the Soviet Union, Communist China, Cambodia, Cuba, Zimbabwe, Venezuela and North Korea. The results are there for all to see. Private property is the cornerstone of economic development. Any attack on private property is an attack on the economy and an attack on freedom. We also know that, according to government's own statistics, more than 90% of redistributed farms to date has failed and revert to subsistence farming or squatter camp. Expropriation without compensation is dishonest. President Cyril Ramaphosa speaks at the World Economic Forum saying, "Your investments are safe with us." What is the foundation of a secure investment? Property rights. While the state president assures the world that their property would be protected in South Africa, he embarks on a process to have the right to own private property scrapped or at least significantly downplayed. Furthermore, the propaganda tells us that this has to be done so that more black people can own property. The proposed policy is the exact opposite, and if it succeeds to the extent that it is pushed, then nobody will own property, regardless of whether you are black or white. It would be owned by the state. The entire policy is based on a flawed, state-driven land audit that is soaked with errors. That is why we hear the most ridiculous lies, such as that blacks own 1% of the land, being propagated from public platforms. If Cyril Ramaphosa has a grasp on economics, as is said about him, then he of all people should know that tampering with property rights has never worked. The notion that this would be done in a way that would boost the economy is dishonest. Remember that it is the same ANC government that has once said that Afrikaans education would not be targeted, that Eskom would be run efficiently, that corruption would be rooted out, that Paulo Jordan has a doctorate's degree, and that a fire pool is a security upgrade, and also that Julius Malema does not have a future in the ANC. To argue that foreign investments are safe in South Africa is a lie. To argue that expropriation without compensation would be done in a manner that would not hurt the economy is like saying that KFC would be expanded but that no chickens would be harmed in the process. Also, the so-called hunger for land is a lie, at least with regard to agricultural land. 93% of people who went through the effort of instituting land claims have stated that they would rather have money than land. There is a massive rate of urbanization, especially among black people. When the Institute for Race Relations polled South Africans asking them what they believe had to be done to improve their lives, the amount of people who opted for more land reform was 1%. Expropriation without compensation is ahistoric. A man who has evidently never read a history book is now lecturing an entire country about history. The notion is that if you are white and you own land, then you are an illegitimate owner of that land. In other words, all white landowners are thieves because all land belonged to black people. The Natives Land Act of 1913 is then used as proof that black people were violently dispossessed of their land and stuck in homelands that only covered 13% of South Africa's surface. We are also told that black people were not allowed to buy property outside these homelands, or, if that ANC propaganda pamphlet that is currently being circulated on social media is to be believed, that black people were not allowed to own any land anywhere in the Republic. This is hogwash. Of course, we need to be critical of our past, but that can never justify the fabrication of history and the justifying of discriminatory policies based on a flight of fantasy. The history of land ownership is long and complex. But to get the conversation on track, perhaps we should start by acknowledging the following facts. Number one, if you do not have the technology to dig a borehole, which black South Africans didn't have before the arrival of Westerners, then it is only possible for you to survive on 30% of South Africa's surface. Number two, at the time of the Natives Land Act, black people occupied only 12% of South Africa's surface. Number three, black people were allowed to own property within the black homelands as well as outside of those homelands. More than 3,000 black people bought farms outside of the homelands in the 3 decades that followed on the signing of the Act. Number four, large parts of the country were unoccupied when the voortrekkers settled there, and large parts of land was negotiated for and bought by voortrekkers from local black tribes. Number five, in some parts, people were dispossessed, wars were fought. In some cases, black people were massacred by whites, and in other cases, white people were massacred by blacks. Expropriation without compensation is racist. There are some that argue that the various treaties in which white people negotiated for land with black tribal leaders should be disregarded because those black people didn't know what they were doing. This is an argument of black inferiority and should not be entertained. The entire parliamentary debate on expropriation, and the one happening on social media right now, is inundated with anti-white racist rhetoric. Julius Malema's famous "white people are criminals and should be treated as such" comment is but one example. I do not believe that the leadership of the ANC, the EFF and their alliance partners on this issue are so unintelligent, so ill-informed, that they actually believe that tampering with property rights is good for economic growth. Some are honest enough to state that they don't care what happens to the economy as long as black people get the land. And that is the problem. The gratification from hurting white people outweighs the desire to uplift black people. They don't care if the economy crashes, as long as white people are dealt a blow in the process. To paraphrase Margaret Thatcher, they would rather have blacks be poorer, provided that whites are less rich. Expropriation without compensation is theft. If the ANC and the EFF were truly interested in justice and accuracy, they would base their policy and proposals on actual facts. The fact is that the policy aims to take the property that legitimately belongs to the rightful owners thereof and to vest it in the state. If the property was actually stolen, it wouldn't even be given back to the rightful owner, because this is not a policy of restitution, but a policy of nationalization. In other words, every single piece of land that is expropriated by the South African government would be stolen land. A rubber band can only stretch so far before it breaks. That rubber band is about to break. There will be a backlash. Don't let anyone tell you that perhaps we should try this and see what happens. It has been tried dozens of times and it has failed each and every time. My name is Ernst Roets and this is your fact sheet.